Welcome to the Jackson Hole Land Trust 2026 Summer Video Newsletter. Every year we pick a theme and we use that theme to talk about the significance of the Jackson Hole Land Trust's work. This year we're going to talk about national parks and the connection between conservation easements that we have outside of the parks and how those support migrating wildlife from Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. The Jackson Hole Land Trust has been working for over 46 years to protect critical private lands around this ecosystem. To date, we've protected over 66,000 acres of critical lands, and the vast majority of those support wildlife habitats that are moving in and out of Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. We're going to hear from Jenkins, superintendent of Grand Teton National Park. Grand Teton National Park is a critical partner for the Jackson Hole Land Trust. They provide much of the science that we rely on in order to pinpoint our conservation protections. And Chip's going to talk about the significance of working together and how conserving this ecosystem works.
I'm Chip Jenkins, the superintendent of Grand Teton National Park. Private lands outside Grand Teton National Park and throughout this region play a vital role. Grand Teton National Park is a great place for wildlife to spend the summer. It's a really hard place to spend the winter. And as a result of that, many species, pronghorn, deer, go elsewhere for the winter. If you want to be able to see wildlife in Grand Teton National Park, we need to be able to preserve where wildlife goes in the winter. And that often is through, across, or on private lands elsewhere. The reality is that Grand Teton National Park is too small for many of the wildlife species that call this place home in the summer. We need to be able to work with private property owners to be able to support and continue to conserve these populations so that everybody can enjoy them. We deeply appreciate the work of the Jackson Hole Land Trust for developing and maintaining the relationships with private property owners in order to be able to help them continue to be stewards of this place. Grand Teton National Park directly benefits from the work of the Jackson Hole Land Trust in developing those partnerships.
Now we're going to head down to Sublette County. Our Green River Valley program is situated in Pinedale, Wyoming, and protects tens of thousands of acres of critical wildlife habitat and historic family ranches. We're going to hear from the Manning family. The Manning family recently put a conservation easement on their historic homestead, which protects one of the most significant pronghorn migrations in all of North America.
I'm Tessa Manning.
I'm Casey Manning.
We're about 120 miles away from Yellowstone National Park. Yeah, the needs of ranchers really closely align with the needs of wildlife almost all the time. So we really just have to make small adjustments.
Typically, what's good for wildlife is also good for livestock.
And then we did put in wildlife-friendly fencing.
Wildlife-friendly fencing is high enough off the ground to let antelope pass underneath, and also lets mule deer and moose and elk pass over. And it also leaves a gap so that their hind legs don't get hung up as easily, of keeping cows in and letting wildlife pass through.
We did it because there's been so much wildlife on this ranch our whole lives. We wanted to do whatever we could to preserve that and to help their habitat.
Growing up here in a wide open space, you just inherit an appreciation for wildlife, and we want to see that continue on for future generations.
As the area got homesteaded, most of the private land was concentrated on the rivers and around the good wildlife habitat. So the public land is extremely important, but the public land is really severed by big strips of private land that's mostly been used for agriculture. Yeah, we know the pronghorn have been migrating for 6,000 years, and to see their migration destroyed over the course of just 100 years would be really heartbreaking.
Even in my lifetime, I've seen Pinedale change and grow so much, and we had the opportunity to do the right thing and conserve this and keep it a wide open space, and so we did that.
We're going to head up to Park County now to talk about our Park County Open Lands program. Park County is home to some of the most critical wildlife habitat in all of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, encompassing some of the most critical mule deer migrations coming out of Grand Teton National Park, as well as some elk migrations coming out of eastern and southeastern Yellowstone National Parks. We're going to hear from Brian Beauvais, who's going to talk about some of the history of conservation and the history of settlement of the Park County area.
Hi, my name is Brian Beauvais, and I'm the curator of the Park County Archives in Cody. So it's my job to collect local history and then work with researchers to make sure all of our local stories are accessible now and into the future. So before our modern conversations about conservation easements and landscape-wide collaborative efforts to protect Yellowstone, certain people realize that what happens in Yellowstone is only part of a larger topic about broader issues that affect the entire ecosystem. And Buffalo Bill came out here in the 1890s. He started this TE ranch where we are at today, and he realized that protecting places and open spaces on the South Fork of the Shown River are connected to what's going on in Yellowstone because animals move back and forth across the landscape. They're not just sequestered to one spot. So that idea really got its start when General Philip Sheridan had visited Yellowstone in 1881. And even at that early date, he saw wildlife leave the park every fall, every winter, and he saw how they were really subject to hunters and development pressure whenever they would leave the park. And he suggested to the federal government that Yellowstone's boundaries be expanded about 40 miles to the east towards modern-day Cody, towards kind of the Shoshone Canyon, and then about 10 miles to the south into Jackson Hole. And that never really came to fruition, but it was one of the first examples of people realizing that what happens outside of Yellowstone's boundaries is just as important as what's going on in the park itself. I think what I really respect about private property owners around Yellowstone is their ability to see beyond their own lifetimes and understand that what they do on their property miles away from Yellowstone really benefits Yellowstone in meaningful ways and benefits the public good of people wanting to see wildlife and experience these Western landscapes and encounter Western culture in the way it has been for many, many years. And that's a really special attribute to all this land around Yellowstone. Some of the most important ways that working ranches and agricultural lands around Yellowstone help maintain the health and viability of wildlife in the park is by maintaining open space and preserving these really rich and productive agricultural lands. Buffalo Bill also understood that you lose something when you change it too drastically.
Now we'll head over to Beauvais, Wyoming. Our Wind River Valley program is headquartered in Beauvais, and we're going to hear from Bud Betts. Bud not only is a board member of the Jackson Hole Land Trust, but he owns the Absaroka Ranch, which is a critical ranch protecting migrations coming out of southeastern Yellowstone that come down the Dunor.
My name is Robert Bud Betts Jr., and we're at the Absaroka Ranch, 15 miles north and west of Beauvais, Wyoming. Toward the Continental Divide. We're at 7,900 feet. I was on the Land Trust Board back in, probably 20 years ago for about 3 years, and came back on because of the existence and the activity of the Wind River program for the Jackson Hole Land Trust. So the ranch has two, maybe three, two certainly, super important wildlife corridors, and they're both identified by the Game and Fish Department. One is an elk migration corridor, and the other is a deer migration corridor. In fact, the deer migration corridor was just identified by the Game and Fish officially at a commission meeting about a year ago. I can tell you that I watched over 2,200 head of elk come through the ranch last year over about a 6-week period, heading toward the Winter Range, which is designated by the Wyoming and owned by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Our property is one of the most important components of the migration corridor for elk and deer that go through. There's private land to the north, and so far, thank goodness that's protected, and hopefully we can protect that in a stronger way. And then there's open national forest and open BLM and state lands to our east, which we are right in the center of. So yes, we are a hugely important part of those two corridors, the elk corridor and the deer corridor. Starting about 3 years ago, and we're going to continue to do it, is we've been replacing old barbed wire, 4-strand and 5-strand barbed wire, which has been here for a long time, with wildlife-friendly fencing. And the way you construct it is they're different kinds, but it's actually it's cheaper than buck and rail fence now. And buck and rail fence actually aesthetically is quite nice, but it's not as friendly as wildlife-friendly fencing. You know, the reason that we protect these migration routes is if we're going to have these wildlife, and the abundance of wildlife that we have is we have to have that corridor, those middle zones between their summer habitat, which is in the greater Yellowstone area, definitely in the mountains, more in the mountainous terrain, and in the winter range areas, which are in the front lands, or if you could call it that, or the front country lands, down many of which are on agricultural lands, which hopefully are preserved and amenable to wildlife, as well as game and fish lands. So we are the central component. If we didn't have that link, I don't think we'd have the wildlife, if it was all houses and development, if you will.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in to our summer video newsletter. We hope you've learned about the connection between national parks and conservation easements and the critical role that the Jackson Hole Land Trust plays in protecting our national parks. The Jackson Hole Land Trust is currently working on over 30 conservation easements, collectively protecting an additional 29,000 acres. Of that 29,000 acres, the majority of that protects critical migration corridors and winter range habitat. We want to thank all the landowners who've taken steps to permanently protect their land via conservation easement. We could not do this work without you. We also want to thank all of our donors. Our work relies on the support of our communities, and we want to thank you for supporting the critical work that we do.